An exciting story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. 11 years after disappearing without a trace, she returned, with the son he never knew he had. He cried when he saw her, but not from joy. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by how it unfolds. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The rain hammered against the windshield of the old Honda with an insistence that seemed to mock the courage Lauren was trying to gather. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Luke sleeping in the back seat, his angelic face contrasting with the storm forming in her chest. 11 years. 11 years since she had left that town, that life, that man who had loved her in a way that hurt as much as it healed. The GPS indicated they were only 2 miles from downtown Germantown, but every yard traveled seemed to drag. With it, ghosts she had buried so carefully. The familiar landscape began to take shape through the mist. Houses with German architecture, meticulous gardens, the cobblestone streets that glistened wet under the faint light of the street lamps. Everything exactly as it was in her memory, as if time had respected her absence and kept every detail untouched, waiting for her return. Lauren didn't want to be there. God knew how much she didn't want to be, but her mother's death had made inevitable what she had managed to avoid for more than a decade. Bureaucratic issues, inheritance, papers that only she could sign, and especially Luke's questions that became more insistent each day. "Mum, why do we never visit Grandma?" he had asked 3 months ago when she was still alive in the hospital. "Why do you get sad when you talk about the town where you were born? Why do I dream about places I've never seen?" These questions pierced the veil Lauren had built around the truth. Luke wasn't an ordinary child. At 10 years old, he drew with a disturbing precision places he had never visited, talked in his sleep in phrases that sounded too old for his age, and sometimes looked at her with an intensity that reminded her of other eyes. Dark eyes. Deep. As wells, that had once loved her with a fury that confused protection with imprisonment. The town opened before them like a healed wound that still hurt when touched. Lauren drove through the familiar streets, instinctively avoiding the main, a street where she knew the Blackwood mansion stood. Not yet. First, she needed to check into the small inn she had reserved, give Luke time to wake up, give herself time to breathe and find strength for what was to come. The Hydrangea Inn was on a side street, away from the main tourist attractions. It was simple, discreet, exactly what Lauren needed. The owner, a woman in her 60s with grey hair tied in a bun, welcomed her with a warm smile that faltered when her eyes fixed on Lauren's face. "My God," the woman murmured, bringing her hand to her chest. Aren't you Lauren Pierce?" Lauren's stomach dropped. She had changed her last name years ago, created a new identity in Palm Harbor, but faces were hard to fool in a small town where everyone knew each other. "No, ma'am, my name is Lauren Davis," she lied, forcing a smile. "You must be mistaken." The woman studied her for a few more seconds, suspicion dancing in her eyes, but finally shook her head. "Sorry, dear. It's just that you have a striking resemblance to a young woman who lived here long ago. She, disappeared suddenly, caused quite a stir at the time." Lauren took the keys with hands that trembled imperceptibly and went up to the room with Luke, who was beginning to wake up. The boy stretched and looked out the window, his face lighting up with curiosity. "What a beautiful place, Mum. It feels like I've been here before." Her son's words pierced Lauren's chest like a blade. She sat on the bed beside him and ran her fingers through his dark hair, so similar to his father's that it still made her ache. "It's a tourist town, honey. Maybe you've seen it in a movie or TV show." Luke looked at her with that intensity that disconcerted her, as if he could see through the lies she had built around their life. "I dreamed about a big house last night. It had a dark hallway no one could enter, and a woman crying." He paused, touching his own forehead. "In here, inside my head, she's always crying." Lauren felt her blood freeze in her veins. Isabella. He was dreaming about Isabella, Alexander's sister, who died in the fire. But how was that possible? Luke had never heard of her, had never been in that house. "They're just dreams, sweetie. Let's take a shower and go out for dinner, okay?" But when Luke went into the bathroom, Lauren had to hold onto the wall to keep from collapsing. The memories came back like a flood. The first time she saw Alexander in the university library, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. The way he courted her with a patience that hid a desperate urgency, as if he knew their time would be counted. The nights at the Blackwood mansion, when she felt like an intruder in a world of luxury and traditions that weren't hers. And Isabella, sweet, melancholic Isabella, who had welcomed her like a sister and who spoke about ancient secrets, about the weight of carrying a surname that came with expectations and curses for generations. "You don't understand," Isabella had said on one of those nights, as they drank wine on the porch overlooking the gardens. "In this family, loving someone is always dangerous. Love here has teeth, Lauren, and it bites until it bleeds." The next morning, Isabella was dead. Lauren shook her head, pushing away the memories. She couldn't allow herself to sink into that past. Not now, with Luke depending on her strength. But as she helped her son get ready for dinner, a certainty grew in her chest like a poisonous plant. She wouldn't be able to avoid it forever. Truth had a way of imposing itself, and Luke was becoming a bridge between past and present that she didn't know how to control. They had dinner at a small German restaurant downtown. Luke was fascinated by the decoration, the architectural details, the atmosphere that seemed straight out of a dark fairy tale. Lauren tried to keep the conversation light, but she felt the curious glances from other customers. Some recognized her, she was sure. Discreet whispers reached her table like needles piercing the armor she had built around her new life. When they returned to the inn, Luke was sleepy again, but before going to bed, he asked a question that froze Lauren's blood. "Mom, who is Alexander?" She almost dropped the glass of water she was drinking. "Why do you ask, honey?" "I dreamed about him yesterday too. A tall man with sad eyes. He was crying and repeating a name. Your name." Lauren sat on the edge of the bed, her heart beating, so hard she was sure Luke could hear it. "You must have heard that name somewhere, sweetie. Maybe at school." But Luke shook his head with a conviction that sent chills down her spine. "No, Mom, I know him. In here," he said, touching his chest, "and he's suffering a lot." That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. She stood by the window of the room, looking at the town lights and knowing that somewhere, in a mansion that dominated the landscape like a scar on the horizon, Alexander Blackwood might also be awake, fighting demons she had helped create when she fled without explanation. Dawn came grey and cold, typical of the Pennsylvania winter. Lauren knew she couldn't delay any longer. She had to resolve her mother's inheritance issues, but before that, she needed to find Alexander. She needed to look him in the eyes and explain, after 11 years, why she had disappeared as if she had never existed. She left Luke at the inn with a book and some games, promising to return in a few hours. The owner, Mrs. Helen, offered to look after the boy, and Lauren gratefully accepted. The walk to the Blackwood mansion took 20 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. With each step, the memories became more vivid, more painful. The first time Alexander took her to see the house, the pride in his eyes when he introduced her to the family, the coldness of his mother, Victoria, who treated her with icy politeness, but made it clear that a poor girl from the outskirts would never be welcome in that world. And Isabella, always Isabella, serving as a bridge between two worlds that seemed incompatible. The mansion appeared before her like a materialized ghost. The imposing architecture remained intact, but there was something abandoned in the air, as if the house had been waiting for years for something that never arrived. The garden, once meticulously maintained, showed signs of neglect. The windows of the north wing were boarded up with wooden planks, as Lauren had imagined they would be. No one had entered there since the fire. She took a deep breath and rang. The doorbell. Footsteps approached from the other side of the door, heavy and slow. When the door opened, the world stopped. Alexander was there, taller than she remembered, thinner too. His dark hair now had grey strands at the temples, and his face carried marks of suffering that didn't exist 11 years ago. But his eyes were the same, deep, intense, capable of seeing through the soul. For a moment he simply looked at her as if she were a mirage. Then his eyes filled with tears, and Lauren saw the exact moment when he understood that she was alive, real there in front of him. "Lauren," his voice came out broken, unrecognizable. "Hi, Alexander." They stood looking at each other, two survivors of a shipwreck that happened more than a decade ago, trying to understand how it was possible to be there alive, facing each other. "I thought," he began, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized. "They told me you had died in the fire, that your body—" "I didn't die, I ran away." The words fell between them like stones in still water. Alexander leaned against the doorframe, as if his legs could no longer support him. "Why?" The question came out as a shattered whisper. "Why did you run away without telling me anything? Why did you let me believe that—" "Because I was pregnant." Lauren told the truth at once, like ripping off a bandage. "And because your mother made it very clear that our story couldn't continue." Alexander went as pale as paper. "Pregnant." He repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. "You were— where is—" "With me. At the inn." Lauren felt tears burning in her eyes. "He's 10 years old, Alexander, and he has your eyes." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander leaned against the wall, and Lauren saw the moment when everything collapsed inside him. Anger, pain, love, loss, all mixed in a storm of emotions he was trying to process. "A son," he murmured, and then shouted, "I have a son." His voice echoed through the empty mansion, and somewhere upstairs, Lauren heard hurried footsteps. Victoria came down the stairs like a dethroned queen, her face contorting into a mask of shock and fury when she saw Lauren. "You." The word came out as a curse. "You can't be here." "Mother." Alexander turned to her, his eyes shining with a fury Lauren had never seen. You knew she was alive." Victoria raised her chin, defiant. "I protected our family, as I always have. This woman was never good for you, Alexander, and now she comes back with stories. With stories." Alexander took a step toward his mother, and Lauren saw in him a man she didn't recognize. Harder, more dangerous. "She's telling me I have a son, Mother, a son that you kept from me for 10 years. "Alexander, please," Lauren intervened, feeling the tension explode around them. "It wasn't like that. I chose to leave, no one forced me." But he looked at her with an intensity that made her back away. "You chose? Or did someone convince you that you had no choice?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Lauren looked at Victoria, saw the challenge in her eyes, the calculated coldness of someone who had always known how to play the game of social survival. "I want to meet my son," Alexander said, turning to Lauren. "Now." "Alexander, wait. He doesn't know who you are. It needs to be slow, careful." 11 years, Lauren. You took 11 years of my son's life from me. 11 years I'll never get back. The pain in his voice was physical, palpable. "Don't. Ask me to be patient now." Victoria went up the stairs without saying anything more, but Lauren saw the silent promise in her eyes. The war was just beginning. Alexander put on a coat and followed her down the street, maintaining a distance that respected her space, but made it clear he wouldn't be pushed away again. As they walked, Lauren told him about Luke, how smart and sensitive he was, how he liked to draw and read, how sometimes he said things that seemed to come from another time, another place. "He dreams about this town," she said, "about places he's never seen, about people he doesn't know." Alexander stopped walking. "What kind of dreams?" "About the mansion, about a forbidden hallway, about a woman crying." Alexander's face closed in an expression Lauren knew well. It was the same one he made when talking about Isabella, about the fire, about everything he had lost on that terrible night. "He dreams about my sister." "How is that possible, Alexander? He never heard of her." "I don't know. But in this house, in this family, there are things we don't understand, things that pass through the blood like a cursed inheritance." When they arrived at the inn, Mrs. Helen welcomed them with a smile that died when she saw Alexander. She went pale, brought her hand to her chest, and for a moment Lauren was sure the woman would faint. "Mr. Alexander," she whispered. "Sir, is it really you?" "Hi, Mrs. Helen, it's been a long time." The woman looked from Alexander to Lauren, and understanding dawned in her eyes like the rising of a terrible sun. "My God in heaven, so you really are Lauren Pierce." Lauren didn't deny it this time. There was no point anymore. Luke was in the inn's living room drawing at a low table. When he looked up and saw Alexander, his pencil stopped in mid-motion. The two stared at each other in silence, father and son recognizing each other in a silent communication that needed no words. "You're the man from my dreams," Luke said, his voice small but firm. Alexander knelt in front of him, tears running freely down his face. "And you're the boy I've waited my whole life to meet." Luke extended his hand and touched Alexander's face, as if checking if he was real. "Why are you sad?" "In my dreams." "You're always sad." "Because I didn't know. You existed, my son, and that hurts me very much." Luke looked at Lauren, then back at Alexander. "Mom gets sad sometimes too. When she thinks I'm not looking, she cries." Embarrassment filled the room. Mrs. Helen discreetly withdrew, and Lauren sat down beside the two, her heart torn between the relief of finally having the truth exposed and the terror of what would come next. "Luke," she said softly, "this is your father." The boy nodded as if he had always known. "I know, he has the same eyes I do." Luke looked at Alexander again. "In the big house, there's a door no one can open. Why?" Alexander and Lauren exchanged a look loaded with meaning. "How do you know about that door, sweetie?" Lauren asked. "The sad lady showed me. She said there are secrets hidden there, secrets that make everyone cry." Alexander sat heavily in a chair. "Luke, this lady, what does she look like?" "Beautiful, but always crying. She has long hair and a white dress. She stays in the dark hallway and calls for you, Dad. She says she has something important to tell, but no one listens." Lauren felt a shiver run down her spine. Luke's description was exactly how Isabella was the last time she saw her, wearing the white silk nightgown she wore to sleep, her hair loose over her shoulders. "Alexander," she whispered, "this isn't normal." But Alexander was looking at the drawing Luke had made. It was the Blackwood mansion in perfect detail, including the north wing with its closed windows. And on the paper, a female figure stood out in one of the windows, as if observing from inside. "My God," Alexander murmured. He drew Isabella in her bedroom window. "Who's Isabella?" Luke asked, with the natural curiosity of a child. Alexander looked at Lauren, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, knowing there was no more protecting Luke from the truth. "She was my sister, Luke. She died before you were born, in a fire at our house." Luke considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "She didn't die, Dad. She's just trapped. And she's asking for someone to open the door." Luke's words echoed in the silence of the room like a death sentence. Alexander remained motionless, the drawing trembling in his hands, while Lauren felt the world tilt beneath her feet. A 10-year-old child shouldn't know these things, shouldn't draw with such precision a place he had never seen, much less claim, with such conviction that a person dead for 11 years was merely trapped. "Luke, my love," Lauren said, trying to keep her voice steady, "people who die don't get trapped, they go to a better place." But the boy looked at her with that disturbing intensity she knew well, the same as Alexander's eyes, only amplified by something she couldn't name. "Mom, she didn't die. I see her every night. She walks down the hallway and knocks on the door, but no one opens. She's afraid." Alexander rose abruptly, walking to the window. Lauren could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fists closed and opened in an internal struggle she recognized. It was the same struggle he fought 11 years ago, when things started to go wrong at the Blackwood mansion. "Alexander," she called softly, "maybe we should take Luke to dinner and talk about this later." "No." He turned, his eyes shining, with a determination she hadn't seen in years. "I won't pretend I didn't hear this. I won't spend another 11 years ignoring signs." He knelt again in front of Luke, taking the small hands between his. Son, you said the lady wants someone to open a door. What door is that? Luke closed his eyes as if concentrating, and when he opened them again, there was a wisdom in them, too old for his age. The door at the end of the burned hallway, it has a golden lock with flower designs. She says there's a box hidden behind the wall with important letters. Alexander's blood froze. The golden lock with rose designs was from Isabella's secret room, a small space she used as a personal office, where she kept her diaries and correspondence. Not even he knew of the existence of this room until a few months before her death, when he found her crying in there, holding papers she quickly hid when he entered. "My God," Alexander murmured. "How do you know about the secret room?" "What secret room?" Lauren asked, feeling a chill run up her spine. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered well. Isabella had a hidden room behind a bookcase in her library. Very few people knew of its existence. I only discovered it by chance a few months before the fire. And you never mentioned this to the police? To the investigators? What investigators, Lauren? The bitterness in his voice was palpable. My mother made sure there was no investigation. She said it was evident it had been an accident, that Isabella smoked in secret and must have left a cigarette burning. The case was archived in less than a week. Lauren vaguely remembered the comments in town at the time. The Blackwood family had enough influence to silence anything that could tarnish their reputation. But now, hearing Alexander, she realized there were layers of secrets she had never suspected. Alexander, if this room really exists and was never investigated, then there might be evidence of what really happened that night. He finished the sentence, rising with an energy she hadn't seen in him in years. Lauren, I need to enter the north wing. Absolutely not. The response came out faster and firmer than she intended. Alexander, that place has been sealed for 11 years. It could be dangerous. The structure might have been compromised by the fire. Or my mother might have sealed it because she knew there was something there that shouldn't be found. The comment hung in the air between them, like an unspoken accusation. Lauren looked at Luke, who was watching the conversation with growing interest, clearly understanding more than a child should. Luke, why don't you go play in the inn's garden while your father and I talk? But the boy shook his head with determination. No, Mom, this is about the sad lady, and she asked me to help. She said you'll need me to find the truth. Before either of them could respond, Mrs. Helen appeared at the door of the room, her face pale and her hands trembling. Excuse me, she said, her voice hesitant. I didn't mean to listen, but are you talking about Miss Isabella? Alexander turned to her, surprised. Did you know her? Know her? Child, I worked at the Blackwood mansion for 15 years before opening this inn. I took care of Miss Isabella since she was a little girl. Tears began to stream down the wrinkled face of the woman. And I can assure you one thing. She didn't die in that fire. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Luke stopped moving his pencils as if feeling the weight of the revelation. What do you mean, Mrs. Helen? Lauren asked, feeling her heart race. The woman looked around as if expecting someone to be listening, then approached and lowered her voice. On the night of the fire, I was in the house preparing dinner for a visitor Victoria was expecting. I saw Miss Isabella go up to her room around 9 o'clock. She was nervous, agitated, holding an envelope in her hands. Half an hour later, I saw her coming down the back stairs, still with the envelope, but now also carrying a small suitcase. Alexander moved closer, hanging on every word. Where did she go? To the north wing, as she always did when she wanted to be alone. But this time she wasn't alone. Mrs. Helen paused, wiping away tears. Victoria followed her. I saw her going up the stairs a few minutes after Miss Isabella, and she didn't look happy at all. My mother followed Isabella to the north wing. Alexander repeated the words as if trying to process them. And then? Then I don't know. I was in the kitchen when it started to smell like smoke. When I went out to see what was happening, the entire north wing was already in flames, and Victoria was in the garden in her nightgown, screaming that we needed to call the fire department. And Isabella? Lauren asked, though she already feared the answer. Never saw her again. Victoria said she died in the fire, that they couldn't save the body. But I always thought it was strange. What? The fire started very quickly, very uniformly. I've seen accidental fires and they don't spread like that. And there was a strange smell in the air. It wasn't just burning wood smoke. Alexander sat down heavily, the weight of the revelations clearly affecting him. Why did you never tell this to anyone? Mrs. Helen gave a bitter laugh. Tell who, boy? Your mother fired me the day after the fire, said she no longer needed my services, gave me a generous amount and asked me not to talk about that night with anyone. A simple woman like me against a family like yours, who would believe me? Lauren felt the pieces beginning to fit together in an image that terrified her. If Mrs. Helen was telling the truth, then Victoria not only knew more about Isabella's death than she admitted, she might have been responsible for it. Mrs. Helen, said Lauren, you said Isabella took a suitcase to the North Wing. Do you have any idea what might have been in it? Papers, for sure. Miss Isabella was always writing, always keeping documents. In the last months before what happened, she seemed obsessed with something. She spent hours in her secret room writing letters she never sent. Letters to whom? Alexander asked. Mrs. Helen looked directly at Lauren. To Miss Lauren mainly, piles and piles of letters addressed to you. The world spun around Lauren. Letters. Isabella had written letters to her, letters she never received. And what if some of those letters contained information about what really happened that night? I never received letters from Isabella, she said, her voice coming out choked. Because they were never sent, Alexander murmured, understanding dawning on his face. My mother intercepted them. Luke, who had been quiet during the entire conversation, suddenly stood up and walked to the window. He stood there, observing something none of them could see. She's here, he said, his voice strangely calm. Who's here, my love? Lauren asked, approaching him. The sad lady. She's in the garden, pointing to the big house. Luke turned to them, his eyes shining with a light that wasn't natural. She says you need to go tonight, that if you don't go today it might be too late. A cold wind came through the window, making the curtains flutter strangely. Mrs. Helen crossed herself and murmured a prayer, while Alexander and Lauren looked at each other, both feeling that something much bigger than them was unfolding. Alexander, Lauren said, her voice almost a whisper. I'm afraid. He approached her, and for the first time since they met again, touched her face with the same tenderness of years ago. I am too. But I can't live the rest of my life without knowing the truth about what happened to my sister. And now, knowing that I have a son, his eyes moved to Luke. I need to protect you both, and for that I need to know what I'm protecting against. His touch on her skin awakened memories Lauren had tried to bury, nights of passionate love, at the Blackwood mansion, promises whispered in the darkness, the way he looked at her as if she were the only real thing in the world. But along with the good memories came the bad ones, the fights, the sickly jealousy, the possessiveness that sometimes suffocated her. I'm not the same person I was, Alexander, she said, gently moving away. 11 years change people. No, I've changed too. He lowered his hand but continued looking into her eyes. But what I feel for you, that never changed. Even thinking you were dead, even spending all these years trying to forget, I never could. The raw honesty in his voice hit her like a punch to the stomach. Lauren felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to maintain control. She couldn't allow herself to fall back into that abyss of destructive passion that had almost destroyed her once. Alexander, we can't. Mum. Luke's voice interrupted the loaded moment between them. The sad lady said there's something important for you to know before going to the house. They all turned to him. The boy was standing in the middle of the room, but his eyes seemed to be seeing something none of them could perceive. What does she want to tell us, son? Alexander asked, carefully approaching. She says she wasn't the only person who died that night. That there are more secrets buried in the house. Secrets about you, Dad, and about Mom. A chill ran down Lauren's spine. What other secrets could be hidden in the Blackwood mansion? Luke, did she say anything else? The boy nodded gravely. She said the bad grandma is afraid of you discovering the truth, and that she'll try to stop you from entering the house. But there's a way to get in without her knowing. What way? Alexander asked, through the secret passage in the garden, the one that leads directly to the basement of the north wing. Alexander went pale. How does he know about the secret passage? I only discovered it myself when I was 16. Helen approached, placing her hand on Luke's shoulder with maternal affection. This boy has a gift or a curse, depending on how you look at it. He's seeing things that happened in the past, talking to someone who should have been dead for 11 years. She looked at Alexander and Lauren. If you're going to do this, you'll have to be very careful. The Blackwood mansion has always been a strange place, but after the fire, people in town talk about lights that appear in the sealed windows, about screams that come from inside the house on stormy nights. They're just superstitions, Alexander said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. Maybe. Or maybe Isabella really is trapped there, waiting for someone to discover the truth. As the afternoon advanced, they carefully planned how to enter the mansion without alerting Victoria. Alexander knew his mother's routine. She took a sleeping pill every night at 10 o'clock and usually remained unconscious until dawn. The secret passage Luke had mentioned was at the back of the property, hidden by a bush of azaleas that no one had trimmed in years. But as they prepared for the night mission, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Several times looking out the window, she had the impression of seeing a figure standing in the street, observing the inn. When she called Alexander's attention, the figure had already disappeared. "I'm imagining things," she murmured, closing the curtains. "Or, my mother is keeping watch over us," Alexander replied, his voice somber. "She's always been paranoid about the family's reputation. If she suspects we're planning something—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air between them. Victoria Blackwood was a woman accustomed to controlling every aspect of life around her, and would not hesitate to take drastic measures to protect the family's secrets. At night, after Luke fell asleep, Alexander and Lauren prepared for the invasion of the mansion. Mrs. Helen had offered to look after the boy, and despite initial reluctance, Lauren agreed. She couldn't expose her son to the dangers they might encounter in the north wing. But when they went to check on Luke before leaving, they found the bed empty. Panic instantly took hold of them. They searched the entire inn, called his name, but there was no trace of him. It was Mrs. Helen who found the note on the living room table, written in Luke's still childish handwriting. "Gone to help the sad lady. Don't worry, she will protect me. Meet me in the secret room." "My God," Lauren murmured, her legs weak. He went to the mansion alone. Alexander was already grabbing the car keys. "Let's go, now." The race to the Blackwood mansion was a blur of dark streets and growing terror. Lauren couldn't stop thinking about all the terrible things that could be happening to her son in a house full of deadly secrets and a woman capable of killing to protect them. When they arrived at the property, they found the gates open, something Alexander said never happened at night. The mansion was plunged into darkness, except for a faint light coming from one of the sealed windows of the north wing. "How is that possible?" Alexander murmured, looking at the light. "There hasn't been electricity in that wing for 11 years. They went around the house to the back, where they found the entrance to the secret passage exactly where Luke had said it would be. The small wooden door, hidden by decades of vegetation, was ajar. Alexander turned on the flashlight he had brought and examined the footprints in the damp earth. Small footprints of a child leading into the passage. "He really came through here," he said, his voice tense. Alone in the dark, they entered the passage, which was narrower than Lauren had imagined. The walls were of damp stone, covered with cobwebs and decades of abandonment. The air was stale, loaded with the smell of mold and something else, something sweet and sickening she couldn't identify. The passage extended perhaps 100 yards before opening into the basement of the north wing. When they emerged, they found themselves in an old wine cellar with wine racks covered by a thick layer of dust. Alexander's flashlight revealed more footprints on the floor, leading to a wooden staircase that went up to the main floor. "Alexander," Lauren whispered, "how did Luke know about this passage? And more importantly, how did he know how to get to the secret room?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." They climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting their full weight on it. The wood was partially damaged by the fire, but could still support them. When they reached the main floor of the north wing, they were hit by the strong smell of old smoke and wet ashes. The destruction around them was impressive. Charred walls, furniture reduced to burned skeletons, carpets that were now just dark stains on the floor. But what most caught their attention was the way the fire had spread, very uniformly, as if it had been started at several points simultaneously. "This wasn't an accident," Alexander murmured, examining the burn patterns on the walls. They followed Luke's footprints through the destroyed corridors until they reached Isabella's library. The room had been less affected by the fire, probably because the doors were closed at the time of the fire. The bookcase that hid the secret room was charred but still standing, and when Alexander pushed it, it moved with a loud groan of burned wood. The secret room was intact. It was small, no larger than a closet, but it was perfectly preserved. There was an antique desk, a cushioned chair and shelves on the walls covered with books, papers and letters, and sitting in the chair as if waiting for them was Luke. "Took you long enough," he said, looking at them with a smile that wasn't entirely his. "She said you would come." "Luke," Lauren ran to him, checking if he was hurt. "My love, how did you get here? Why did you leave the inn alone?" "She brought me. She showed me the way." Luke pointed to the desk. "And she told me to get these letters for you." In his small hands he held a stack of yellowed envelopes. At the top of the pile, Lauren could see her own name written in Isabella's elegant handwriting. Alexander approached slowly, as if the EEE letters were bombs about to explode. "They're the letters Isabella wrote to you," he said. "The letters my mother intercepted." Luke held out the letters to Lauren, but when she went to take them, he held her hand. "Mom, she wants you to read them here, now. She says there's something very important you need to know before leaving this room." With trembling hands, Lauren took the first letter and opened it. The date at the top showed it had been written 3 days before the fire. Alexander held the flashlight so she could read, and as her eyes scanned the lines, her face became increasingly pale. "My God," she murmured. "Alexander, you need to hear this." And she began to read aloud. "My dear Lauren, if you're reading this letter, it means my suspicions have been confirmed, and I am no longer among the living to tell the truth. What I've discovered about our family is too terrible to be kept. Secret, but too dangerous to be revealed while our mother is alive. Lauren, you need to know the truth about why she hates you. It's not just social prejudice, as everyone thinks. It's because you discovered something she would kill to keep hidden. Do you remember the night you heard voices coming from Dad's office? When you found those documents about properties in the names of dead people?" Lauren stopped reading, her blood freezing in her veins. She remembered that night, a few days before the fire. She had entered Richard's office looking for Alexander and accidentally knocked over a pile of papers from his desk. When she tried to organize them again, she noticed something strange. Property deeds in the names of people she knew had died years ago. "Continue," Alexander said, his voice tense. "Our mother discovered that you saw the documents. She doesn't know exactly what you understood, but she can't risk you telling anyone. The properties, Lauren, were purchased with money from fraudulent life insurance. People were killed so our family could get their properties. And there's more. I discovered that you're not the first woman Alexander loved who mysteriously disappeared. 5 years ago, before you met him, he was engaged to a young woman named Gabrielle Sanders. She also questioned certain family activities, and she also disappeared on a stormy night. They found her car in a ravine, but never found the body. Lauren, our mother is planning something against you. I've heard phone conversations, seen documents being burned. You need to leave town immediately. Don't trust anyone in the family, not even Alexander. He's innocent, but our mother has ways of manipulating him that you can't imagine. If something happens to me before I can warn you personally, look for these letters. They're hidden in my secret room, along with all the evidence I've gathered about our family's crimes. Turn everything over to the police, but only to someone from outside the town. Our influence here is too great. And, Lauren, there's one last thing I need to tell. You, something that will change everything." The letter ended abruptly, as if Isabella had been interrupted in the middle of writing. Lauren turned the page, but there was nothing more. What was the last thing? Alexander asked, his voice almost inaudible. Lauren picked up the next letter from the pile, but before she could open it, Luke stood up from the chair as if in a trance. She says, "Now you know enough to understand why she had to die," he said, but his voice sounded different, more mature, with inflections that reminded them of Isabella, and that the person who killed her is coming up the stairs at this very moment. From the lower floor came the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming toward them. The footsteps echoed through the charred corridor like a countdown to the apocalypse. Alexander instinctively placed himself in front of Lauren, and Luke, his muscles tense like violin strings about to snap. The light from the flashlight flickered in his hands, creating dancing shadows on the burned walls that seemed to move with a life of their own. "Hide the letters," he whispered, without taking his eyes off the entrance to the secret room. "Quick." Lauren tucked the letters inside her blouse, feeling the rough paper against her skin. Luke remained strangely calm beside her, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. The footsteps approached slower now, deliberate, like those of a predator who knows its prey has nowhere to run. When the figure appeared at the entrance to the secret room, the flashlight revealed not Victoria, as Alexander expected, but a tall, thin man, dressed in an impeccable dark suit despite the hour and the location. His grey hair was perfectly combed, and his cold eyes shone with a disturbing familiarity. "Dr. Henry," Alexander murmured, the shock evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" The man smiled, but there was no warmth in that expression. Lauren vaguely recognized him. He was the Blackwood family's lawyer for decades, a man who had always been present at the most important social events in town, always at Victoria's side like an elegant and silent shadow. "I've come to prevent you from making a terrible mistake, my dears," said Dr. Henry, his cultured voice echoing strangely in the small space. "Meddling in matters you don't understand can be dangerous." "We know about the fraudulent insurance," Alexander said, taking a step forward. "We know about Gabrielle Sanders and about what really happened to Isabella." The lawyer's smile widened, becoming almost caricatural. "Ah, but you still don't know anything." Isabella's letters tell only a small part of the story, the part she managed to discover before becoming a problem. "Problem?" Lauren found her voice, though it came out trembling. "She was your daughter." "No, my dear," Dr. Henry said, approaching a step. "Victoria didn't kill Isabella. I killed her." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Luke seemed paralyzed, his supernatural connection momentarily interrupted by the shock of the direct confession. Alexander moved instinctively, placing himself completely in front of Lauren and Luke, but the lawyer raised a hand in a sign of peace. Now, there's no need for dramatics. If I wanted to kill you, you would already be dead. I'm here to offer a deal." "What kind of deal?" Alexander asked, his voice as sharp as glass. "The same one I offered Isabella, actually. She could have accepted it and would still be alive. Silence in exchange for a comfortable life far from here." Dr. Henry walked casually to the desk, running his fingers over the documents still spread on it. "You see, the Blackwood family has always been my masterpiece. For 40 years I've helped build an empire based on, let's say, creative opportunities. When inconvenient people died, I ensured their properties found new, more suitable owners. When investigations became problematic, I ensured they were filed away. When young women asked too many questions—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "Gabrielle Sanders didn't die in an accident," Lauren said, more a statement than a question. Smart, as always. "No, Gabrielle didn't die in an accident. She discovered some banking documents she shouldn't have seen, started making connections she shouldn't have made. I tried to convince her to accept a generous amount and disappear, but she refused. Said she loved Alexander too much to allow him to live with blood on his hands." Alexander went livid. "You killed my fiancée, and I didn't even know she had discovered something." "Because you were innocent, my dear boy. You always were. Your mother and I made sure to keep you away from the more unpleasant aspects of the family business. You were the perfect facade. Handsome, charismatic, genuinely kind. The ideal heir for an empire built on corpses." Lauren felt nausea rise in her throat. It all made sense now. Why Victoria hated her so much, why there was such urgency to push her away from Alexander, why Isabella had died exactly when she started asking questions. And Isabella discovered the truth about Gabriel, she said. Isabella, I discovered much more than that. The lawyer picked up one of the letters from the desk. Evidently, there were more than Luke had taken. She discovered that I didn't work just for your family. I worked for several influential families in the region, all with the same two problems: inconvenient people who needed to be removed, properties that needed to change hands, investigations that needed to be silenced. He opened the letter and began to read. Dr. Henry is not just the family's lawyer. He is the leader of an organization that has been killing for money for decades. I have names, dates, evidence of at least 12 murders in the last 20 years, and I discovered that my own father was one of the victims. Alexander staggered as if he had been punched. My father was murdered. Richard was beginning to develop an inconvenient conscience in the last years of his life, started questioning certain decisions, wanting to move away from the darker businesses. We had to make a difficult decision. You killed my father. Alexander's voice came out as a low roar, pregnant with a fury Lauren had never seen in him. It was necessary, and your mother agreed, obviously. She knew that without Richard causing problems, you could expand the business indefinitely. The revelation hit Alexander like a tsunami. His own mother had agreed to the murder of her husband. Lauren saw the exact moment when something broke definitively inside him, the last illusion about his family crumbling like a house of cards. But Isabella discovered everything, continued Dr. Henry, apparently oblivious to the agony he was causing. She was smarter than we imagined. She found documents we didn't even know existed, made connections that took years to make, and then she made the fatal mistake of trying to blackmail me. She tried to blackmail you? Lauren asked. She wanted me to confess everything, to turn in the names of everyone involved, to turn myself in to the police. In exchange, she wouldn't disclose the evidence she had gathered. An idealistic young woman, like you. He sighed theatrically. I had to explain to her that things don't work that way. Luke, who had remained silent during the entire confession, suddenly moved. He walked up to the lawyer with steps too firm for a child, and when he looked up, his eyes shone with a light that was definitely not his own. You didn't explain anything to her, he said, but the voice that came out of his mouth was feminine, mature, loaded with pain and fury. You strangled her while she begged for the life of the baby she was expecting. The blood of everyone in the room froze. Dr. Henry stepped back, for the first time showing something that could be fear. What baby? Alexander whispered. Luke, or Isabella, speaking through him, turned to his father. I was pregnant, Alexander, 3 months along. That's why I was so desperate to stop Dr. Henry. It wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting my child. Lauren felt tears streaming down her face. Isabella was pregnant when she died. A double life had been taken on that terrible night. By whom? Alexander asked, his voice broken. By the man I loved, but could never have publicly. The man our mother considered unsuitable for the Blackwood family. The connection hit Lauren like lightning. The incomplete letter, the mention of someone forbidden, Isabella's desperation in the last months. It was Dr. Henry, she said, horrible understanding dawning. You were pregnant by him. The lawyer laughed, a cruel sound without humor. Smart. To the end. Yes, Isabella and I had an involvement. She believed it was love. For me, it was just convenient to have someone from the family under my emotional control. But when she discovered the truth about my business, everything changed. You killed your own girlfriend and your own child, Alexander said, the revulsion clear in his voice. I killed 2 people who could have destroyed decades of careful work. It was a business decision. Luke, Isabella, moved closer to the lawyer, and when he spoke again, his voice was loaded with supernatural fury. But you made a mistake, Henry. You killed me, but you didn't destroy me. And for 11 years, I've been waiting for the opportunity to tell the truth. Ghosts can't testify in court, Dr. Henry said, trying to recover his composure, but Lauren could see the sweat on his forehead. No, But letters can. Photographs. Can recordings can. Luke pointed to the desk, where a small antique recorder was hidden among the papers. Isabella recorded your confession, Lauren murmured. She knew you would come after her. The realization hit Dr. Henry like a shot. He lunged toward the desk, but Alexander was faster. The two men collided in a tangle of limbs and fury, rolling on the small floor of the secret room. "Take the evidence and get out," Alexander shouted as he struggled with the lawyer. "Take Luke and go." But Lauren couldn't move. She was hypnotized by the fight, by the fear that Alexander might be hurt, by the sudden responsibility of protecting her son, and the evidence that could finally bring justice for Isabella. It was Luke who took the initiative. With movements too precise for his age, he began to gather documents, photographs, and the recorder, stuffing everything into a canvas bag that was hidden behind the desk. "Mom, we need to leave now," he said, his voice returning to normal. "She says more people are coming." As if invoked by his words, voices echoed from the lower floor, several people coming up the stairs, speaking in urgent and angry tones. Victoria was among them. Alexander managed to immobilize Dr. Henry, but the older man was surprisingly strong. He pushed Alexander against the wall and ran for the exit of the secret room. "Victoria," he shouted, "they have the letters. They have everything." Victoria's voice echoed through the corridor like the roar of a wounded beast. "Kill them all. There can't be any witnesses left." Alexander stood up, blood flowing from a cut on his forehead, and looked at Lauren with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "There's a window in the room next door that leads to the roof of the west wing. It's our only chance." They ran through the charred corridor, Luke carrying the bag with the evidence while the voices approached dangerously. The room Alexander had mentioned was an old office with a large window that indeed led to a sloped roof. Alexander opened the window and looked outside. It was a drop of at least 12 feet to the ground, but the roof of the west wing offered a safer path. "I'll go first," he said, "then past Luke, and finally you, Lauren." But when he started to go out the window, Luke held him by the arm. "Dad, she wants me to tell you something important before we leave." "What is it, son?" "She says your mother doesn't know about the baby. If she knew that Dr. Henry killed his own grandchild, she would kill him with her own hands. This might be useful." Alexander nodded, understanding the strategy. Victoria, as cruel as she was, had a code when it came to family. Killing a pregnant Blackwood would be unforgivable even for her. They managed to exit through the window and cross the roof without being detected. The descent was dangerous. Alexander had to hold Luke while Lauren went down first. Then he passed the boy to her arms before jumping. They ran through the dark gardens of the mansion, hearing shouts of anger coming from the north wing. Dr. Henry had discovered their escape, and the search was already beginning. When they reached the car, Alexander turned to Lauren, held her face between his hands, and kissed her with a desperate intensity. It was a kiss of farewell, of apologies, of love never forgotten and present terror. "I'm going to stay," he said when they separated. "I'll confront my mother. I'll tell her about the baby. I'll turn Dr. Henry over to the police." "No," Lauren said, holding his hands. "I won't leave you alone again. If we're going to face this, we face it together. Lauren, it's too dangerous. If something happens to you or Luke—" "Nothing will happen," Luke interrupted, his voice again carrying echoes of Isabella. "She says the time for truth has come, that the dead will no longer be silent." As if summoned by his words, the sky opened in a sudden storm. Lightning cut through the darkness, illuminating the Blackwood mansion in a ghostly light. And in the sealed windows of the north wing, figures moved, not those of Dr. Henry and his henchmen, but shadows of people who seemed to have been waiting for decades to be seen. "My God," Lauren whispered. "How many people died in that house?" Alexander looked at his family's mansion as if seeing it for the first time. Centuries of secrets, decades of murders, generations of guilt and silence. Everything was finally coming to the surface like bodies, rising from a deep lake. "Many," he said. "Too many." Lauren took out her cell phone and called the police, but not the local station. She called a contact she had in Portland, a detective she had met during her years on the run, someone she trusted not to be in the hands of the Blackwood family. Detective Sanchez? This is Lauren Davis. I need to report multiple homicides and a criminal organization. And I have all the evidence. While she spoke on the phone, Alexander knelt in front of Luke, who now seemed like a normal child again, frightened and tired from the night's adventure. Son, you've been very brave tonight. Braver than any adult should ask of a child. She needed my help, Dad. She was alone for a long time. Isabella isn't alone anymore, Alexander said, running his hand through his son's hair, and neither are we. When Lauren finished the call, she approached the two, and for the first time in 11 years they embraced as a family. Not a perfect family, not a family without problems, but a real family, forged in the fire of truth and tempered by survival. What happens now? Lauren asked. Now we wait for the detectives to arrive from Portland, and then we enter that house and confront all the demons my family created. The storm increased in intensity, as if the sky itself was preparing to cleanse decades of sins. And in the Blackwood mansion, the lights continued to move in the sealed windows, a silent reminder that some secrets are too big to remain buried forever. Alexander looked at Lauren, really looked, for the first time since they met again. He saw the strong woman she had become, the brave mother who had protected their son for 11 years, the person he still loved despite all the years and all the lies between them. Lauren, he said, his voice low so Luke wouldn't hear. When all this is over, when the truth comes out and the guilty pay, will you stay? Will you give us a chance to be a real family? She looked into his eyes, saw the man who had matured through pain, who had lost everything but was still capable of love, who was willing to destroy his own family to protect her. I'm already here, she said simply, and this time I'm not going away. The kiss they exchanged was sealed by the rain and witnessed by the ghosts of a family built on lies that was finally about to face the truth. The rain hammered the roof of the car like bullets, creating a hypnotic rhythm that contrasted with the electric tension in the air. Alexander, Lauren, and Luke waited in the darkness, watching the Blackwood mansion, where lights moved frantically from window to window. Victoria and Dr. Henry were looking for them, but had not yet discovered they had already left the property. How? Long until the police arrive, Alexander asked, checking the clock on the dashboard. Detective Sanchez said 2 hours, Lauren replied, clutching the bag with the evidence against her chest. He's coming with a team specialized in organized crime. Luke, who had remained quiet in the back seat, suddenly leaned forward. She says we can't wait 2 hours, he said, his voice again carrying the echoes of Isabella. Dr. Henry is planning to burn the entire mansion to destroy the evidence they couldn't get, and there are innocent people inside. What innocent people? Alexander turned to look at his son. The employees who live in the house. The new housekeeper. Your mother hired last week. The gardener who sleeps in the attic when there's a storm. Luke touched his own forehead, as if receiving information directly to his mind. They don't know anything about the crimes, but they'll die if the house catches fire. The moral dilemma hit Alexander like a punch to the stomach. He couldn't simply sit there waiting for the police while innocent people were in danger. But he also couldn't risk the lives of Lauren and Luke by going back to that hell. Lauren, take the keys and go with Luke, he said, already getting out of the car. Meet the police on the road and turn over the evidence. I'll warn the people about the fire. No way. Lauren got out of the car after him, drenched by the torrential rain. I already said I won't leave you alone again. And I'm going too, Luke said, getting out of the back seat. She needs me to guide you through the safe paths. Alexander looked at the two, the woman he loved and the son he barely knew, but who already meant everything to him. The idea of exposing them to more danger made him physically sick, but he also knew Luke was right. Without Isabella's supernatural guidance, they would get lost in the dark mansion and could end up trapped in the fire Dr. Henry was planning. All right, he said, pulling them into a quick but intense hug. But you do exactly what I say, when I say it. Agreed? Agreed, Lauren said, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of rain and fear and desperate love. They ran back to the property, using the cover of the trees to approach the house without being seen. The mansion looked even more sinister under the storm, its illuminated windows creating a ghostly contrast against the black sky. Luke guided them to a back entrance that Alexander didn't even know existed, a small door that led directly to the kitchen. When they entered, they found the housekeeper, a woman in her 50s, trying to protect the windows from the rain coming in. "Mrs. Mary," Alexander said, startling the woman, "you need to leave the house immediately. It's dangerous to stay here." The woman looked at him with relief and confusion. "Mr. Alexander, good thing you arrived. Mrs. Victoria is in a terrible fury, shouting about people invading the house, and that lawyer, Dr. Henry, is acting very strangely. He told me to leave, but where can I go in a storm like this? To town. There's a shelter in the central church. Go now, Mrs. Mary. And if you find the gardener, take him too." The housekeeper nodded, took her purse, and left through the back door, disappearing into the rainy darkness. Alexander sighed. In relief, one less person to worry about. "And now?" Lauren asked. "Now we need to find the gardener and anyone else who might be in the house. And then—" Alexander looked toward the upper floor, where they could hear raised voices arguing. "Then we have to confront my mother." They went up the back stairs, Luke guiding them through corridors that Alexander had known since childhood, but that now seemed strange and threatening. The discussions coming from the main office were getting louder as they approached. Completely incompetent. Victoria's voice cut the air like a blade. "How could you let them escape? They were 2 people and a child." "Victoria, you need to calm down," came Dr. Henry's response. "They can't have gone far, and without the main evidence, they can't prove anything." "Without the main evidence? You told me they took everything." "They took Isabella's letters." "Yes, but there are other things, other documents I kept in a more secure location. Documents you never knew existed." There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice was ice-cold. "What documents, Henry?" Alexander, Lauren, and Luke approached the half-open door of the office, hiding in the dark hallway to listen to the conversation. What they heard left them paralyzed. "Documents about you, my dear, about things you did before I appeared to clean up your messes. You think it was just coincidence that I appeared in your life exactly when you needed someone to solve your marital problems. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the death of your first husband, Victoria, Alexander's father. It wasn't a heart attack, it was poison. Poison that you administered over months, little by little, to make it look like natural death." The world tilted beneath Alexander's feet. His mother had poisoned his father. Not just agreed to his death, as Dr. Henry had said before, but actually killed him with her own hands. "You're lying," Victoria's voice came out trembling. "I have the vial of arsenic you used. I have the fake prescriptions you got from the pharmacist you were blackmailing. I have photographs of you buying the ingredients. I have everything, Victoria. Why would you keep those things? Why would you blackmail me after all these years working together?" Dr. Henry's laugh was like glass breaking. "Because you were never my partner, my dear. You were my first client, and clients who know too much about my methods eventually become risks." There was the sound of a chair being violently dragged, and Victoria's voice went up an octave. "You used me from the beginning, made me fall in. Love with you convinced me to kill Richard, and then blackmailed me to continue killing for you. And it worked perfectly for decades, until Isabella started asking questions." "Isabella," Victoria's voice broke. "My girl, my sweet girl." "Your sweet girl was pregnant, Victoria." The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander felt Lauren take his hand and squeeze it hard. Luke remained completely still, as if even Isabella was holding her breath. "Pregnant." Victoria repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. 3 months along. "With my child." Your child?" "Our affair had been going on for 2 years. She believed I would leave you to be with her, poor innocent child." The scream that came from Victoria's throat was animal, primitive, full of a pain and fury that transcended human words. There was the sound of things being broken, of furniture being knocked over, of a woman completely losing her sanity. "You killed my daughter. You killed my grandchild." She was going to expose us, Victoria. She was going to destroy everything we built. She was pregnant. She was a Blackwood. She was my blood. Alexander could no longer stay hidden. He burst through the office door, followed by Lauren and Luke, finding a scene of absolute devastation. Victoria was standing in the middle of the destroyed room, holding a silver candlestick like a weapon, while Dr. Henry backed against the wall. "Mother," Alexander said, his voice loaded with all the emotions he couldn't process. Victoria turned to him, and Alexander saw that she was completely destroyed. Tears ran down her face, her hair was disheveled, and her eyes shone with a madness he had never seen in her. "Alexander," she whispered, "my son, he killed your sister. He killed her baby." "I know, Mother. We heard everything." Dr. Henry took advantage of the distraction to move toward the door, but Luke blocked his path. The boy seemed much older than his 10 years, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the authority of a dead woman demanding justice. "You're not leaving this time, Henry, not after what you did to me and my child." The lawyer looked at Luke with growing horror. "This is impossible. You died. I killed you. You killed my body, but you didn't kill my soul, and you certainly didn't kill my thirst for justice." Victoria approached Dr. Henry, still holding the candlestick. 40 years, she said, her voice coming out as a deadly whisper. 40 years being your puppet, 40 years believing you loved me, 40 years killing for you. Victoria, you need to understand. I understand perfectly. She raised the candlestick. How you made me kill my own husband, made me become a murderer, and then you killed my daughter and my grandchild. Alexander moved quickly, grabbing his mother's arm before she could attack. Mother, no. Let justice handle him. What justice, Alexander? The same justice we bought and sold for decades? The same justice we silenced whenever it suited us? She was right, and Alexander knew it. But he also knew that if she killed Dr. Henry right there at that moment, she would never be able to prove her own innocence in the crimes he forced her to commit. Mother, look at me, he said, holding her face between his hands. Do you want to honor Isabella's memory? More than anything in the world. Then help us turn him over to real justice. Help us expose everything he did, all the crimes he committed. Let the world know that you were a victim, not a willing partner. For a moment, Victoria hesitated. Alexander could see the internal struggle in her eyes, decades of hatred and manipulation fighting against the love she still felt for her family. That's when they heard sirens in the distance. The police, Lauren said. They arrived sooner than we expected. Dr. Henry took advantage of the distraction to pull a gun from the desk drawer. In seconds, the atmosphere in the room completely changed. Nobody is turning anyone over to justice, he said, pointing the gun alternately at Alexander, Lauren, and Luke. All of you know too much. You have to die. No, Luke said, walking calmly toward the armed man. You're the one who has to die. Luke, no, Lauren shouted, but the boy continued walking. She's here with me, said Luke, his voice strangely calm. She never left me, and there are other people here too. As he spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. The windows began to vibrate, even without wind outside. And in the shadows around the room, figures began to materialize. First, just vague outlines, then more defined forms. My God, Victoria whispered. Gabrielle. One of the figures became clearer. A young woman with brown hair wearing the same dress she wore on the day she disappeared 5 years ago. Victoria, Gabrielle's voice echoed, as if coming from very far away. You knew what he was going to do to me. You knew and did nothing to warn me. I couldn't, Victoria cried. He said if I told anyone, he would kill me too. More figures appeared, men and women of various ages, all victims of Dr. Henry over the years. The room became crowded with the dead he had created, all looking at him with eyes that accused and demanded justice. Dr. Henry backed up to the wall, the gun trembling in his hand. This isn't real. You're all dead. I killed you." "And now," said Isabella, speaking through Luke, but also materializing as a translucent figure beside him, "it's our turn to kill you." The ghostly figures began to move toward Dr. Henry. He fired, but the bullet passed right through them. He fired again and again until the ammunition ran out. That's when the sirens stopped outside the mansion and authoritative voices shouted through megaphones, "This is the Portland Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Alexander looked out the window and saw at least 6 patrol cars and a complete tactical team surrounding the property. "Detective Sanchez isn't joking," Lauren murmured. Dr. Henry, cornered by the ghosts of his victims and the police outside, did the only thing he had left. He pulled a second gun, smaller, that he kept hidden in his ankle holster. "If I'm going to die," he said, "I'll take all of you with me." But before he could fire, Victoria moved. She threw herself at him with the force of decades of repressed anger, and the two fell to the floor in a desperate struggle for the gun. Alexander tried to help, but Lauren held him back. "Let her," said Lauren. "She needs this." The shot echoed through the mansion like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Dr. Henry was motionless on the floor, his eyes glazed over, staring at the ceiling. Victoria was sitting beside him, the still smoking gun in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "There," she said, looking at Alexander. "It's over. Finally over." The ghostly figures began to disappear one by one, as if they had finally found peace. Isabella was the last, stopping beside Luke to whisper something in his ear before completely vanishing. "What did she say?" Alexander asked his son. "She said thank you, and that now she can rest." Luke smiled, seeming like a normal child for the first time since they arrived in town. "And that you're going to be very happy together." The doors of the mansion opened with a bang as the tactical team invaded the house, followed by Detective Sanchez and a team of investigators. They found a destroyed but finally free family, standing next to the body of the man who had terrorized their lives for decades. "Detective Sanchez," Alexander said, raising his hands, "I'm Alexander Blackwood. This is Lauren Davis, who called Hayu, and this is my son, Luke." The detective, a man in his 40s with grey hair and intelligent eyes, quickly assessed the scene. "Where is the evidence you mentioned?" Lauren handed over the bag, still protecting it against her chest. "Everything is here. Letters, documents, photographs, recordings, evidence of at least 12 homicides committed by this organization over 20 years. Detective Sanchez nodded to his team, who began to process the crime scene and catalogue the evidence. "And you, ma'am?" he asked Victoria, who was still sitting on the floor next to Dr. Henry's body. "You'll need to come with us to make a statement." "I know," she said, standing up with difficulty. "I did terrible things, Detective, things I can never repair. But I did them because he blackmailed me, controlled me, threatened me." "That will be determined during the investigation, ma'am." As Victoria was being taken away by the police, she stopped in front of Alexander. "My son," she said, touching his face with genuine tenderness for the first time in years, "take good care of her. And the boy, don't make the same mistakes I made. Mother, don't forgive me easily, Alexander. I need to pay for my crimes, but know that everything I did most terribly was out of fear. Fear of losing you, fear of being abandoned, fear of facing the truth." She kissed his forehead and allowed herself to be taken away, walking out of the Blackwood mansion for the last time. When the house was finally empty except for the reunited family, Alexander, Lauren, and Luke found themselves alone in the destroyed room where so many secrets had been revealed. "And now?" Lauren asked. Alexander looked around the mansion that had been his prison for so long, then looked at the woman he loved and the son he barely knew but who already meant everything to him. "Now we start over," he said. "Somewhere else, far from, here like a real family. And the mansion. It will be sold. The money will go to the families of Dr. Henry's victims." Alexander held Lauren's hands. "I want Luke to grow up in a place where there are no ghosts from the past, where he can just be a normal child." Luke smiled, looking lighter than at any moment since they arrived in town. "She agreed," he said. Isabella agreed. She said it's time to let the dead rest and let the living live. The following morning, as they left town forever, Alexander stopped the car on a small road that overlooked the Blackwood mansion. From above, it seemed smaller, less imposing, just an old house, full of bad memories. "No regrets?" Lauren asked, holding his hand. "None," Alexander replied, kissing her fingers. "Just gratitude that we found our way back to each other." As they drove away, none of them looked back. The past was dead and buried finally, and the future, for the first time in their lives, was full of infinite possibilities. 3 months. After the confrontation at the Blackwood mansion, life had taken a form that none of the three had imagined possible. Alexander, Lauren, and Luke settled in a rented house in Palm Harbor, far enough from the past to breathe freely, but close enough to the sea for the salt breeze to wash away the last layers of pain they carried. The house was simple compared to the mansion where Alexander grew up: 3 bedrooms, a cozy living room, a kitchen that opened onto a small garden where Luke had planted daisies. It had no luxuries or ostentation, but it had something the Blackwood mansion never had: peace. Alexander woke up every morning still half surprised not to be alone. Lauren slept beside him, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face relaxed, like someone who could finally rest without nightmares. In the first days, he would just watch her sleep, afraid it was a dream that would dissolve with a sudden movement. "You watch me sleep every morning," she murmured on one of these occasions, her eyes still closed, but a smile playing on her lips. "How? Do you know? Because I feel your eyes on me, and because you've been doing it for 11 years in my dreams." He leaned in to kiss her, a slow and deep kiss that tasted of morning coffee and fulfilled promises. "In your dreams?" "Every night, Alexander. During all those years, I dreamed that you found me and told me you forgave me for leaving." "There's nothing to forgive, love. You did what you had to do to protect our son." Lauren opened her eyes, and in them was a vulnerability she rarely showed. "Sometimes I'm afraid to wake up and find that this is the dream, that you're not really here with me." Alexander kissed her forehead, then her eyes, then her lips. "I am here. We are all here, and I'm never leaving again." But adapting to a normal life wasn't easy for any of them. Alexander, accustomed to the wealth and power of the Blackwood family, now worked as a financial consultant at a small company, earning in a lifetime what he used to spend in a month. Lauren had secured a position at a private school as a literature teacher, and although she loved the work, the modest salaries required careful planning that she hadn't practiced in years. Luke seemed the most adapted to the change. Since they left Germantown, the dreams of Isabella had completely stopped. He slept through the night, played like a normal child, and only occasionally mentioned the sad lady as a distant memory. He was enrolled in a public school near the house, had made friends, and showed a sharp intelligence that had nothing supernatural about it, just the natural acumen of a child who had lived experiences beyond his years. But it was at night that the real battles happened. Alexander would wake up sweating, shouting names of dead people. Lauren had nightmares about being chased by shadowy figures who wanted to take Luke from her, and both struggled with physical intimacy, decades of trauma creating invisible barriers that needed to be torn down brick by brick. "It doesn't have to be perfect," Lauren whispered on one of these nights after he woke up from a particularly violent nightmare. "We don't have to pretend we're people who haven't suffered." "I want to be the man you deserve," Alexander replied, his voice broken. "I want to give you and Luke a life that makes up for all the years we lost." "Alexander," she held his face between her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "I don't want compensation. I want you, all of you, including the parts that are hurt." It was on that night that they truly gave themselves to each other for the first time since the reunion. It wasn't the desperate and urgent sex of the past, fueled by youthful passion and forbidden desire. It was something deeper, more devastating in its simplicity. It was the love of 2 people who had walked through hell separately and chosen to find each other on the other side. They loved each other slowly, relearning each other's bodies, discovering how pain had changed each touch, each sigh. Tears mixed with pleasure, and when they finally gave themselves completely, it was as if they could finally breathe for the first time in 11 years. "I never stopped loving you," Alexander whispered against her sweaty skin. "Not even when I thought you were dead. Not even when I tried to hate you for abandoning me." "I never stopped either," Lauren replied, kissing the scar he had on his chest, a cut he'd gotten in the fight with Dr. Henry. "I tried. God knows I tried. But you were engraved in my soul in a way I couldn't erase." The next morning, Luke immediately noticed the change between them. During breakfast, he observed how they moved in sync, how they exchanged looks loaded with intimacy, how Alexander kissed Lauren's shoulder when he passed behind her to get the sugar. "Are you going to get married?" he asked directly, as only children know how to do. Alexander almost choked on his coffee. Lauren turned red to her ears. "Why do you ask that, honey?" she managed to say. "Because now you look at each other the same way characters in movies look at each other when they're going to be together forever." Luke took a bite of his toast and added casually, "And because last night you made a lot of noise in the bedroom." Embarrassment took over the table, but also laughter. Genuine, light laughter, the kind that hadn't echoed in that house for months. "Luke," Alexander said, trying to maintain his composure, "there are some things about relationships between adults that— Dad, I know how babies are made. I learned in school last year." Luke looked at the two with a wisdom that sometimes scared them. "The question is, are you going to have more babies? Because I would like to have a little brother." The question hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Alexander and Lauren hadn't yet talked about the future in specific terms, about marriage, about more children, about building something permanent together. They had been so focused on healing the wounds of the past that they hadn't allowed themselves to dream about the future. "That's a conversation your dad and I need to have first," Lauren said diplomatically. "But you will, right?" Luke insisted. "The conversation, I mean." Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "As we will, son, we will." That afternoon, after Luke went out to play with the neighborhood friends, Alexander and Lauren finally had the conversation they had been postponing. They sat on the small porch of the house, sharing a bottle of cheap wine that they savored, as if it were the most expensive champagne in the world. "I want to marry you," Alexander said without preamble, "not because it's the right thing to do, not because we have a child together, but because I can't imagine a future where you're not by my side." Lauren felt her heart race, but also a twinge of fear. "Alexander, we're barely learning to live together. We still have so much to resolve, so much to heal." "And you think we'll resolve it all alone?" "That will heal separately." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Lauren, I spent 11 years trying to heal alone. It didn't work. It only started working when you came back." "But what if it doesn't work out? What if we discover we're too different from who we were 11 years ago? What if—" He silenced her doubts with a kiss. "What if it does work? What if we discover we're exactly the people we need to be for each other? What if all this pain, all this separation, was necessary to transform us into people capable of building something real together?" Lauren looked into his eyes and saw not just love but a determination she recognized. It was the same determination he had to face his family, to discover the truth about Isabella, to protect her and Luke when everything fell apart. "I don't have a ring," he continued. "I don't have money for a luxurious ceremony. I can't offer you a life of wealth." "Alexander, let me finish. I can't offer you anything I offered in the past, but I can offer you something I never could offer before. The true version of myself. No family secrets, no lies, no shadows from the past. I can offer you a man who loves you more than his own life and who will spend each day proving it." Lauren felt tears running down her face, not tears of sadness but of a happiness so pure it hurt in her chest. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to marry you." The kiss they exchanged was sealed by the setting sun of Palm Harbor and by the laughter of children playing in the street. It was a perfect moment in its imperfection, common, in its extraordinariness. But the happiness was interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Alexander answered, and by his face, Lauren immediately knew something was wrong. "Detective Sanchez," he said. "Yes, I'm listening." The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but when Alexander hung up, he was pale. "What was it?" Lauren asked, already feeling the familiar fear settling in her stomach. "The investigation of Dr. Henry's organization's crimes revealed much more than we expected. They had cells in at least 5 states, with dozens of people involved, and some of these people have been arrested in the last few days." "That's good, isn't it?" "It would be if it weren't for the fact that 3 of them managed to escape before arrest, and Detective Sanchez has reason to believe they know where we are." Lauren's blood froze. "They're coming after us?" "Sanchez thinks so. We're the only witnesses who can connect the entire network. With my mother in prison and cooperating with the investigation, we are now the only ones who can completely destroy the organization." Lauren looked toward the yard, where she could hear Luke's voice playing with friends. "How much time do we have?" "Sanchez said his team intercepted communications suggesting they already know our approximate location. They might be on their way." "Then we have to leave. Again." The pain in her voice broke Alexander's heart. They had just found a life, had just found each other, and already they would have to run again. Sanchez offered police protection, a witness protection program until all those involved are captured. That means living in hiding indefinitely. It means Luke growing up in fear, looking over his shoulder. Or it means being alive so he can grow up. They were silent for a few minutes, each processing the implications. After finding peace, after beginning to build a normal life, the past had come back to haunt them once more. "There's another option," Alexander said finally. "What option?" "We can face them. We can stop running and resolve this once and for all." Lauren looked at him as if he had gone mad. "Alexander, they're professional killers. We're no match for them. Not alone, but with the help of the police, with a well-thought-out plan. You're talking about using ourselves as bait. I'm talking about ending this forever, so that Luke can have the normal childhood he deserves, so we can get married and have more children without living in fear." The proposal was insane, dangerous, potentially suicidal. But as Lauren thought about it, she began to see the logic. How many years could they spend running? How many times would they have to restart their lives from scratch? How many more traumas would Luke have to face? Would Detective Sanchez support a plan like this? He mentioned it would be the most effective way to capture the fugitives. But he said the decision had to be ours. Lauren looked at the simple house they had transformed into a home, at the garden where Luke had planted flowers, at the future they were building brick by brick. "If we do this, if we really face them, there's a real chance we might not survive." "There is. But there's also a chance that we'll finally be free. And Luke will be in a safe place during the operation." Sanchez guaranteed that. Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. She could choose the relative safety of eternal flight or the mortal risk of absolute freedom. When she opened her eyes, she saw Alexander watching her with an expression she knew well, the same one he gave her when they were young, as if she were the most important thing in the universe. "When will they get here?" she asked. "Sanchez thinks within 48 hours. "Then we have 48 hours to develop a plan that keeps us alive and free forever." Alexander smiled, a fierce and determined smile. "Or we die trying." "Or we die trying," she agreed. That night, after Luke fell asleep, they made love with an urgency that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with farewell. Each touch was a promise, each kiss was a prayer, each movement was a way of saying, "If this is our last night, let it be a night worthy of a lifetime of love." When they finished, they lay intertwined, listening to the sound of the sea in the distance and the peaceful breathing of Luke in the room next door. "Alexander," Lauren whispered in the darkness. "If something happens to me during the operation, it won't happen. If it does, do you promise you'll take care of Luke? That you'll tell him about our story, the real story, without omitting even the bad moments?" Alexander hugged her. "Tighter. I promise. But only if you promise the same thing in case I'm the one who doesn't come home. I promise." They sealed the agreement with a kiss that tasted of tears and hope in equal parts. The next morning, Detective Sanchez arrived, early with a small but specialized team. The plan they developed was simple on the surface, but complex in the details. Lauren and Alexander would stay in the house, maintaining their normal routines, while a surveillance team would hide waiting for the killers to appear. When they attacked, the police would intervene. "It's important that you act completely naturally," Sanchez explained. "If they suspect it's a trap, they'll leave and try to get you at another time when we're less prepared." Luke would be taken to a safe house 2 towns away, under the protection of a team specialized in child security. He didn't know the details of the plan, just that he had to spend a few days with new friends while his parents resolved adult matters. "I'll miss you," he said, hugging Alexander and Lauren at the door. "But I'll be fine, and you'll be fine, too, right?" "We'll be fine, my love," Lauren said, kissing his forehead. "In a few days we'll all be together again forever. And then we can talk about the little brother?" Alexander laughed, despite the tension. "And then we can talk about the little brother." As the police van drove away with Luke, Lauren felt a piece of her heart go with him. But she also felt something else, an iron determination to do whatever was necessary to ensure he could return to a truly free life. "Ready," said Alexander, putting his arm around her. "Now we just wait. And pray we survive what's coming." "And pray we survive what's coming," he agreed. The day passed slowly, each hour dragging like eternity. They tried to maintain normality. Alexander worked on his laptop. Lauren graded papers. But both were constantly alert for any unusual sound, any suspicious movement. It was at nightfall that things started to happen. Detective Sanchez spoke into the hidden communicator that Alexander carried. "We have movement. 3 vehicles approaching the house by different routes. Prepare yourselves." Alexander looked at Lauren, saw his own tension reflected in her eyes. "Are you ready for this? Ready to end this once and for all?" They kissed one last time, a kiss that tasted of courage and desperation, and then positioned themselves in the living room, trying to look like a normal couple watching television on any ordinary night. Outside, footsteps quietly approached the house. The final battle was about to begin. The first steps around the house were almost inaudible, but Alexander and Lauren felt them like earthquakes in their already stretched nerves. They remained on the living room sofa, pretending to watch a cooking show on television, while every fiber of their bodies was alert to the danger approaching. 3 entry points being tested, Detective Sanchez whispered through the hidden communicator in Alexander's ear. "Back door, kitchen window, and master bedroom window. They're doing reconnaissance." Lauren held Alexander's hand with a strength that left his fingers numb, but he didn't complain. He knew she was fighting against every maternal instinct that screamed for her to run after Luke, even knowing he was safe. "Movement at the back door," came Sanchez's voice again. "They're forcing the lock. 3, 2, 1. The back door opened with a soft click. Careful footsteps crossed the kitchen toward the living room where they were. Alexander squeezed Lauren's hand in a sequence, 3 short squeezes, 2 long, the code they had agreed on for "Be strong, I love you." 3 figures appeared at the entrance to the living room, men dressed in black, faces covered by masks, guns in their hands. The leader, a tall, thin man, made a sign to the others who positioned themselves to block all exits. "Alexander Blackwood and Lauren Davis," said the leader, his voice distorted by an electronic modulator. "You've caused a lot of damage to our business." Alexander stood up slowly, instinctively placing himself in front of Lauren. "If you want to kill me, kill me. But leave her alone. She didn't do anything." The man laughed, a sinister sound that filled the room. "She did much more than you imagine. It was she who called the police. It was she who handed over the evidence. It was because of her that half of our organization is in jail." "Then it's with me you have a problem," Lauren said, standing up next to Alexander. "You don't need to kill both." "Ah, but we do. You two together are too dangerous to remain alive. Separated, you were just ghosts from the past. Together, you're a real threat." It was at that moment that everything went wrong. Instead of waiting for Sanchez's signal for the team to intervene, one of the shooters lost patience and fired. The bullet grazed Alexander's shoulder, making him spin and fall on Lauren, knocking them both to the floor. "No," the leader shouted to his subordinate. "We needed them to confess where the remaining documents are." But it was too late. The shot had alerted Sanchez's team, which burst into the house like an army. Shouts of police echoed from all directions, along with the sound of doors being knocked down and windows being broken. What followed was absolute chaos. The three men reacted differently. One immediately surrendered. Raising his hands, another tried to escape through the front window, and the leader decided that if he couldn't kill Alexander and Lauren the way he had planned, he would at least take one of them with him. He pointed the gun directly at Lauren's head. "If I can't have information, at least I can have revenge," he said, his finger contracting on the trigger. That's when something extraordinary happened. Alexander, still bleeding from his shoulder, threw himself in front of Lauren at the exact moment the man fired. The bullet hit him in the chest, and he fell like a stone to Alexander. Lauren's scream tore through the air like an ambulance siren. But before the shooter could fire again, he was taken down by Detective Sanchez, who had managed to flank him through the kitchen. In a matter of minutes, the three men were handcuffed and being taken to the patrol cars. But Lauren only had eyes for Alexander, who lay on the living room floor, blood slowly spreading across the wooden floor. "Call an ambulance," she shouted, kneeling beside him and pressing her hands against the wound in his chest. "Please, call an ambulance." "It's already on the way," Sanchez said, kneeling on the other side of Alexander. "Can you hear me, Alexander?" He opened his eyes with difficulty, focusing on Lauren's face. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, my love. You saved me. You saved me again." "Luke. Where's Luke?" "Luke is safe. He's safe, and he'll be fine. You'll be fine too, you hear me? Don't leave me now, Alexander, not after everything we've been through." Alexander tried to smile, but the pain was evident. "I love you," he murmured. "I've always loved you. In all possible universes. You're the only—" "Stop talking and save your energy," Lauren cried, his blood staining her hands. "The ambulance is already on its way. You'll survive this. We'll survive this." The ambulance sirens approached like celestial music. The paramedics burst into the house, taking control of the situation with professional efficiency. Alexander was stabilized, placed on a stretcher, connected to equipment that seemed straight out of a science fiction movie. "Will he survive?" Lauren asked the lead paramedic, a man in his 40s with steady hands and gentle eyes. "The bullet didn't hit vital organs, but he lost a lot of blood. He needs surgery immediately." In the race to the hospital, Lauren held Alexander's hand in the ambulance, whispering prayers she hadn't made in years, promises to a God in whom she had stopped believing, bargaining with forces of the universe. She didn't understand. "If you keep him alive," she murmured, "I'll be the best wife he can have. I'll be the best mother to Luke. I'll be grateful every day for the second chance you're giving us." The surgery lasted 4 hours. 4 hours during which Lauren walked the hospital corridors like a lost soul, praying, cursing, calling to check on Luke, who had been informed of what happened and was crying inconsolably in the safe house. Detective Sanchez stayed with her the entire time, bringing coffee she didn't drink, offering words of comfort she didn't hear, just being a solid presence on a night that threatened to turn into her worst nightmare. Family of Alexander Blackwood. The surgeon finally called, a young man with tired eyes but a relieved smile. I'm his fiancée," Lauren said, standing up in such a quick movement she almost fainted. The surgery was a success. The bullet was removed, there was no permanent damage to vital organs, and he's stable. He'll need a few weeks to recover completely, but he'll be fine. Lauren collapsed in a chair, all the emotions she had held back for hours finally exploding in a torrent of tears of relief. "Can I see him?" "He's still under anesthesia, but you can stay with him. In fact, family presence can help in recovery." The hospital room was small and impersonal, dominated by machines that made constant electronic sounds. Alexander seemed smaller in the hospital bed, younger, more vulnerable. Tubes and wires came out of his body in various directions, but his chest rose and fell in a constant and reassuring rhythm. Lauren sat in the chair next to the bed and took his hand, careful not to disconnect any of the equipment. "You did it." "Again," she murmured. "You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me. How many times will you have to save me before you understand that I'd rather die with you than live without you?" As if he could hear her through the anesthesia, Alexander lightly squeezed her hand. It was at that moment that Detective Sanchez appeared at the door, smiling for the first time since Lauren had met him. "I have good news," he said. "The 3 men who attacked you confessed everything in exchange for cooperation agreements. With the information they gave, we were able to locate and arrest the last members of the organization. It's over, Lauren. It's really over." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. There's no one else after you. There's no one else to take revenge. The entire network has been dismantled and you can finally live in peace." Lauren closed her eyes, feeling a weight she had carried for months finally being removed from her shoulders. And Victoria? She'll be tried, but as she cooperated extensively with the investigation, and it became clear she was a victim of manipulation and blackmail for decades, she'll probably get house arrest. She won't return to society, but she won't die in prison either. It was more than Lauren expected in terms of justice for the woman who had made her life hell, but it was also appropriate. Victoria had lost everything: husband, daughter, grandchild, freedom, fortune, and would live the rest of her days knowing her choices had destroyed her family. 3 days later, Alexander woke up completely. The first thing he saw was Lauren's face, who had slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair every night, refusing to go home even when the doctors insisted she needed to rest. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "Hi," she replied, smiling through tears. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but alive." He looked around the room. "How long was I out?" 3 days. The doctors said you'll recover completely, but it will take a few weeks." "And Luke?" "He's anxious to see you." Sanchez said he can bring him this afternoon if you feel up to it. Alexander tried to sit up in bed, grimacing in pain. "I feel up to anything that doesn't involve more people trying to kill us." "About that," Lauren took his hand. Sanchez said, "It's over. They got everyone. There's no one else after us." It took a moment for the news to really penetrate Alexander's still foggy mind. When it did, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply for the first time in months. "Free," he murmured. "We are free. Completely free. We can go back home. We can resume our lives. We can—" "Get married," he interrupted, opening his eyes and looking directly into hers. "We can get married." Lauren laughed, a sound that filled the sterile room with life. "Are you proposing to me in a hospital bed?" "I'm confirming the proposal I made on our porch. Is the offer still standing?" "The offer is still standing." "Then let's get married as soon as I get out of here." And that's exactly what they did. 2 weeks later, when Alexander received medical clearance, they got married in a simple ceremony on Palm Harbor Beach. There were no famous guests, no luxury, no ostentation, just Detective Sanchez as a witness, Luke as the ring bearer, some of Lauren's teacher friends, and the sound of the waves as background music. Lauren wore a simple white dress she bought in a small downtown store. Alexander wore a navy blue suit that Luke helped him choose. The rings were simple gold without diamonds or elaborate engravings, but when they exchanged them, they shone brighter than any jewel from the Blackwood family ever had. Alexander Blackwood said the justice of the peace, a kind man who had agreed to perform the ceremony outdoors. "Do you take Lauren Davis as your wife, to love and respect her, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, for the rest of your life?" "I do, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my future." "Lauren Davis, do you take Alexander Blackwood as your husband, to love and respect him, in sickness and in health, in prosperity and adversity, for the rest of your life?" "I do, yesterday, today, and in all the tomorrows to come." "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Florida, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The kiss they exchanged was sealed by the setting sun of the South, Atlantic, and the enthusiastic applause of Luke, who shouted, Now I can call you Dad officially, loud enough to make everyone laugh. The honeymoon was a week at a small inn in Siesta Key, with Luke along, because after everything they had been through, they couldn't imagine celebrations that didn't include their son. There were 7 days of beach, ice cream, sandcastles, and the kind of normalcy none of them had experienced before. It was on this honeymoon that Lauren discovered she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" Alexander asked, looking at the pregnancy. "Test as if it were an alien object. 3 different tests, 3 positive results." Lauren smiled, a mixture of joy and nervousness. "I think Luke will have the little brother he wanted." Alexander pulled her into a hug that lifted her off the ground, spinning with her on the inn's porch while she laughed and asked him to put her down before she got dizzy. "A baby," he murmured, kissing her neck. "Our baby. Our second baby," she corrected. "Luke is as much yours as this one will be. Our family is growing. Our family is becoming perfect." When they returned to Palm Harbor, Luke received the news of the pregnancy with the seriousness of a child who understands the importance of the moment. "I'm going to be the best big brother in the world," he promised, placing his small hand on Lauren's still flat stomach. "I'll teach him everything I know, I'll protect him from all dangers, and I'll share my toys." "And what if it's a girl?" Alexander asked. "Then I'll teach her to be brave like Mom, and I'll protect her even more." Lauren's pregnancy was smooth, without the fears and uncertainties that marked her previous pregnancy. This time she had Alexander by her side at every medical appointment, holding her hand during each ultrasound, assembling the crib with the care of someone who was fulfilling a dream. Emily was born on a spring morning, 7 months after the wedding. She was a chubby, rosy baby, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's light brown hair. When they placed her in Lauren's arms for the first time, Alexander cried, tears of pure joy, of gratitude for being alive to witness that moment. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand. "She's ours," Lauren replied, and in those 2 words there was a whole universe of meaning. Luke fell in love with his sister the first moment he saw her. He insisted on helping with everything, giving bottles, changing diapers, reading stories to her to sleep. He was protective in a way that touched the heart, always checking if she was breathing when she slept, always asking if she was hungry when she cried. "You're an amazing brother," Lauren said to him on one of these occasions, watching him rock. "Emily with infinite care." "It's because she's my real sister," Luke replied. "Not like in dreams where people go away. This is my real family that will stay together forever." 2 years after Emily's birth, they moved to a larger house in the same neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but with 4 bedrooms, a garden where Luke could play with his sister, and enough space for a family that continued to grow. Alexander had changed jobs, now working as an independent financial consultant, helping small businesses organize their finances. He earned less than he could earn at a large company, but had the flexibility to be present in his children's lives, to not miss any important moment. Lauren had become the pedagogical director of the school where she worked, a position that allowed her to positively influence the education of hundreds of children while maintaining a schedule that fit family life. On Sundays, they had a ritual, prolonged breakfast on the porch, Luke telling invented stories to Emily, Alexander reading news on his cell phone while drinking coffee that Lauren prepared the way he liked, strong with a pinch of cinnamon. They were common, everyday moments, without drama or intensity. They were exactly the kind of moments they had fought for, had almost died for, had rebuilt their lives from scratch for. "Do you regret it?" Lauren asked on one of these Sunday mornings, watching Alexander play with Emily in the garden while Luke tried to teach his sister to identify different types of flowers. "Regret what?" "Losing the wealth, the social status, the life of luxury you could have had if your family hadn't self-destructed." Alexander stopped playing and looked at her with an expression she knew well, the same one he gave her when they were young, as if she were the most important thing in the universe. "Lauren, in the years I spent without you, I had access to all the money and power a person could want. And you know what I discovered?" "What?" "That wealth without love is poverty. That power without family is powerlessness. That social status without genuine people to share it with is absolute loneliness. He approached and kissed her forehead. This simple house with you and our children is worth more than all the Blackwood family mansions combined. Even with the car payments, the bills to pay, the sleepless nights when Emily had colic, especially because of those things, because they're real problems of real people who truly love each other. That afternoon, after the children went to sleep, they sat on the porch as they did every night, sharing a bottle of wine and talking. About the day, about plans for the week, about dreams for the future. "Alexander," Lauren said, nestling in his arm, "I have something to tell you. If it's that you're pregnant again, I'll faint with joy." She laughed. "No, I'm not pregnant, at least not yet," she paused, playing with his fingers. "I received a letter today from the director of a publishing house in New York." "A publishing house?" "They want me to write a book about our story. Someone leaked information about the Blackwood family case to the press, and now there's interest in publishing a first-person account." Alexander was quiet for a few minutes, processing the idea. "And do you want to write?" "I do, but only if you agree. It's our story, not just mine." "What exactly would you—" "Write. The truth, all of it. The love, the pain, the separation, the reunion, the crimes we discovered, how we managed to survive it all." She looked into his eyes. "I think our story can help other people. It can show that it's possible to start over. That it's possible to find happiness after tragedy." Alexander smiled. "Then write, tell our story to the whole world." "Are you sure?" "I am, with one condition." "Which?" "That it ends with a happy ending, because that's how our story really ended." Lauren leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that tasted of wine and fulfilled promises. "Happy ever after," she murmured against his lips. "Happy ever after," he agreed. And there, on the porch of a simple house in Palm Harbor, with the sound of ocean waves in the distance and the muffled laughter of sleeping children upstairs, Alexander and Lauren finally found what they had been looking for all their lives. A love that transcended pain, a family built on truth, and a future that shone with infinite possibilities. Years later, when Lauren's book became a bestseller and was adapted into a television series, when Luke graduated from medical school and Emily showed early talent for painting, when the simple house was exchanged for a slightly larger one to accommodate the third child who arrived when no one expected, they still sat on the porch every night, and Alexander still looked at Lauren as if she were the most important thing in the universe, because she was, and she always would be, forever and ever after happy.